All right, it's that time. Welcome everyone to our Issues and Ideas Forum brought to you by the Mackinac Center for Public Policy. We'd like to thank you all for being here today and investing in your own education on this very important topic of the quality of middle school or middle class schools in Michigan. You'll notice there are several cards on your table. Those cards are for questions. If you have a question for our speaker, you can take one of those cards, write your name on that, please, and write a question if you have that very legibly. Sometimes it's difficult for me to even read my own writing, and so write that as legibly as you can. And you can also sign up for some of our email products on those cards. Michigan Capital Confidential is our news service. You'll see the banner over here. We call it CapCon for short. It's several stories per day to your email box of stories that you normally don't see in the mainstream media. We also have a publication table there where you can pick up many of the things the Mackinac Center has been working on. You also see the full study of what Mr. Izumi has produced for Michigan on your table. Please take one of those. And if you want to take one to pass, please take that as well. We have plenty of those, so please do that. And if you want a shortened version, there's a one-pager of that also on the publications table if you don't want to carry that much to your vehicle on the way out. So please make yourself available of all the things that are here today. We hope that you're enjoying the lunch as well. We also want to tell you about a product that we have called Vote Spotter. You probably saw the banner on the way in. I don't mind if you take your smartphone out at this time and download Vote Spotter. It's all one word, Vote Spotter. And you put in your address and you're able to see what your representative and senator in the state of Michigan are voting on. And you can see which way your representative or senator voted on that bill. And then you can give them a thumbs up or a thumbs down, and you can also email them or call them right from that app. So it's one of the easiest ways of keeping your elected officials accountable by that app, Vote Spotter. It's on Google Play. It's also on the Apple App Store. So please make yourself available to that. That is free. Download it and use it as you wish. Now to our speaker. Lance Izumi is the Koret Senior Fellow and the Senior Director of Education Studies at the Pacific Research Institute in California. He said he had to get on at least 2 or 3 airplanes just to get here to Lansing. There is no direct route from Sacramento to Lansing, Michigan. He's the co-author of the 2011 PRI book, Short Circuited, The Challenges Facing the Online Learning Revolution in California, and is the executive producer and narrator of the National Review online posted short film based on that book. Lance is also the co-author of the groundbreaking book, Not As Good As You Think, Why the Middle Class Needs School Choice, and co-executive producer of the award-winning 2009 broadcast film documentary, Not As Good As You Think, The Myth of the Middle Class School. He also appears in the Academy Award-winning education film documentary. It's called Waiting for Superman. Maybe some of you have heard of that. He was voted Best U.S. Documentary at the prestigious Sundance Film Festival. Mr. Izumi received his Juris Doctorate from the University of Southern California School of Law. He received his Master of Arts degree in Political Science from the University of California at Davis, and his Bachelor of Arts degree in Economics and History from the University of California at Los Angeles. Please join me in welcoming Mr. Lance Izumi.
Well, thank you, Dan, very much for that very kind introduction. I really appreciate that, and I want to thank all of you for taking time out of your busy day to join us all here for this event and for my presentation about middle-class schools here in Michigan. Before I get on to the actual presentation, I want to say a special thank you to the Mackinac Center for Public Policy. It's been a terrific opportunity for those of us at the Pacific Research Institute to work with the team at Mackinac. There's not, I don't think, a better state-level think tank in the country that's done so much great work than the Mackinac Center. And I want to thank specifically Joe Lehman, the president of Mackinac, Mike Van Beek and Audrey Spalding, who are the policy staff folks over at Mackinac, who I would say, I also have to point out, peer-reviewed my study, which we're going to talk about today, and did such a terrific job giving me really insightful comments on specific ways to improve the study with regard to Michigan. Also want to, again, say thank you to Dan Armstrong and Kimberly Fisher-Kinney for organizing this event. Let me also say that I want to thank, from our staff at Pacific Research Institute, Rowena Itchon, who is our Senior Vice President and who has worked with the Mackinac staff to make this event today possible. In that kind introduction that Dan just gave for me, one of the things he didn't mention is the fact that I started off my career not as a researcher or a lawyer, actually, but actually as a speechwriter. So I actually was a speechwriter in President Reagan's administration. I was speechwriter for U.S. Attorney General Edwin Meese. And Rowena was also in the speechwriting unit for the president during those years. And one of the things that President Reagan used to say a lot was that the scariest words that you ever hear from someone is if they come up to you and say, "I'm from Washington and I'm here to help," right? I'll tell you there's only one thing scarier than that, and that's if someone comes up to you and says, "I'm from California and I'm here to help." And so I am from California, but I am truly here to help. And so we're going to talk about middle-class schools here in Michigan. Let me give you a really short history about why we're interested in this topic. A number of years ago, as Dan mentioned, we did a book called Not As Good As You Think. And what we did was we looked at schools in California that were predominantly middle-class student populations. And we wanted to see how well that they did. And we thought that we'd find a few dozen. And it turned out, actually, that we actually found hundreds of schools across California that were very poor performing, that were predominantly middle class, and many of them very affluent. I mean, places like the Silicon Valley, Malibu, San Diego, Orange County, all of these beautiful coastal areas, and some places obviously in the inland areas as well, but all these beautiful picture postcard communities, and yet you had a lot of schools in these areas that were underperforming. And so because of that research that we did, and as Dan mentioned, I was asked to participate in the movie Waiting for Superman. How many of those here actually saw the movie Waiting for Superman? Okay, a number of you saw it. Okay, but what this movie Waiting for Superman did was it followed the lives of maybe half a dozen kids in different parts of the country. And most of them were from low-income, often minority communities. And it would show their efforts to get into a better charter school. They were in regular public schools and were trying to get into a higher-performing charter school. But there was one person, one student in that film, a girl actually from Northern California, who was from a middle-class, upper-middle-class background. And the reason why Davis Guggenheim, the director of Waiting for Superman, asked me to be part of the film was that our research on underperforming middle-class schools was really virtually the only study out there that looked at this phenomenon. And so it turned out that this girl in Northern California attended one of these underperforming schools in this very well-off neighborhood called Woodside out in Northern California, right above Palo Alto, for those of you who know California geography. And so what we decided to do after that, we got a large grant because the Walton Family Foundation was, saw our work and was very interested in this phenomenon and decided that, let's look at other states to see if that same phenomenon that we saw in California was actually replicating itself in other states across the country. And so last year we did studies, Not As Good As You Think studies for Texas and for Illinois. And this year we have just come out with this study on Michigan. And we're going to be coming out before the end of the year with studies in Colorado and New Jersey. And what we've found so far in all the states that we've looked at is that there is this same phenomenon of underperforming schools in middle-class and more affluent areas. And it's not just, in Malibu and the Silicon Valley in California. It's in the Chicago suburbs. It's in wealthy neighborhoods in Dallas and Fort Worth. And now, as you're going to see, it's in places here in Michigan as well. So what kind of schools are we talking about? So what we're talking about are regular public schools, not charter schools, but just regular public schools that have predominantly non-low-income student populations. And how do we define low income or predominantly non-low income? And we say that if there's 33% or less of a school's population that was classified as low income in 2013. What that means is that, so a third or less of the student population at a school were classified as low income based upon whether they were eligible for the National School Lunch Program. That's usually used as a benchmark for whether somebody is low income or not, okay? So if the predominant number of kids at a school, 2/3 or more of those schools at that school was not eligible for the National School Lunch Program, they would be included in our study. And I should point out that 33% is actually a very conservative figure to use as a benchmark because the one other study that we know of that looks at middle-class schools actually defined a middle-class school as a school that had 75% or less of their kids who were non-low income. So if you think that a school that has 75% of their kids who are eligible for the National School Lunch Program, and you're classifying that as a middle-class school, well, you're going to have a real problem when you look at the results. And in fact, the people who did that study actually admitted in one of the footnotes that, you know, a lot of those schools actually performed or looked like low-income schools. Well, you know, when 3/4 of the school is low income, no wonder they do, right? So we wanted to be pretty conservative in, you know, how we define what a predominantly non-low income school looked like. So again, only 1/3 or less of the kids had to be eligible for the National School Lunch Program. So what tests, or how did we measure the performance of these schools? Well, we looked at test scores. And we looked at the 2013 test results for the Michigan Educational Assessment Program, the MEAP, that all of you are familiar with, which is given in grades 3 through 8. And we also looked at the results for the 2013 Michigan Merit Exam for grade 11. And as a check, we also looked at the results here in Michigan for the 2013 National Assessment for Educational Progress. That's a national examination that's often referred to as the nation's report card. And so virtually every state in the country administers this test, and it's given in reading and mathematics, just like the state exams here in Michigan. So when we look at these tests, how do we then define whether a school is underperforming? And how do they therefore then make our list of underperforming schools? Well, we have several definitions. The first definition, which I'm going to talk about and look at some specific schools, is whether half or more of a school's students in at least one grade level failed to meet or exceed the proficient level on either the MEAP or the or the Michigan Merit Exam. So that means that 50% or more of students in at least one grade level examination at that school failed to achieve proficiency, whether it was in mathematics or reading. Now, some people might say, well, you know, if it's only one grade level, does that really mean that that school is underperforming? Should you label that school underperforming? Which is a very good question. But, and the reason why we use this indicator is because there has been research done on how an ineffective classroom in just 1 year affects the performance of kids, not just in that 1 year, but over their school careers. Eric Hanushek, who's probably the nation's top education economist and who's based at the Hoover Institution at Stanford University, has done a lot of research on this. And what he has found that kids who are in a single ineffective classroom can have their education, their learning put back 1.5 years. So, you know, when you have that type of impact from poor performance in just 1 year, it seems legitimate to then say that, you know, if we're looking at least one grade level test where half or more of the students in that grade fail to perform at the proficient level. Okay, so what's the universe of schools we're looking at then? How many schools and how many of them are underperforming according to that definition? So in 2013 in Michigan, there were 677 regular public schools with predominantly non-low-income student population. Again, remember, 1/3 or less of the students at that school were classified as low income. So 677 of these schools you know, most of them that if you were the average layperson looking at these schools would say, well, these are middle-class schools or even affluent schools. And so out of these 677 schools, there were 316, 47%, nearly half, that had half or more of their students in at least one grade level failing to meet or exceed proficient level on the MEP or the Michigan Merit Exam. Now, I'll say this, is that when we look at some of the examples of schools, they're mostly in math. And why is that? Well, there are probably a number of reasons why. I think that the reason why you see a disparity here in Michigan between the rates of proficiency on the state test between mathematics, which is pretty low, and reading, which is significantly higher, is probably because the reading examination here in Michigan is probably comparatively weak. The reason why I say that is because if you look at Michigan's previous state academic content standards in reading and in mathematics, rating organizations who have looked at the rigor of both of those sets of standards have rated them very differently. The Fordham Institute, for example, in Washington, which does a 50-state study on the rigor of state content standards in reading and mathematics, said that in reading, Michigan standards were one of the worst in the country. They gave it a very low D minus score. And so when you have a test a set of standards that's very weak, you're going to have a test aligned to those standards that's probably also comparatively weak and give you an inflated level of proficiency amongst those students. Whereas in mathematics, the Fordham Institute rated Michigan one of the highest in the country. Michigan got an A- grade for their mathematics standards. And so therefore the test that's aligned with those rigorous standards is probably more difficult, and therefore you have fewer students who are probably going to be proficient because it is a more difficult examination. And then this is one of the reasons why, and at the end of my presentation, I'll show you the results on this National Assessment for Educational Progress. When you check those results for this national examination against the Michigan State results, you will see that the math proficiency levels here in Michigan basically roughly mirror the performance of the results on the national exam, but on the reading examination, the results here in Michigan are inflated on the state test versus the results on the national test, which indicates that there's a problem with that reading examination. So let's look at some individual schools in some of the suburbs here in Michigan. For example, in Macomb, which as obviously all of you know is a suburb of Detroit, when the median income this is Mohawk Elementary School, and the median home value in the zip code in which this school is located is $242,500, which is more than double the statewide median here in Michigan. And this school has 15%, this school has 500 students, and 15% of those students in 2013 were considered low income. So a very small number of kids at this school were considered low income, only 15%. So what this graph, this bar chart shows is the percentage of non-low income students who are not proficient in math on the 2013 test, state test. So what you find is in grade 3, 52% of the students at Mohawk Elementary School are not proficient. Then in the 4th grade, you have 58%, and in the 5th grade, 58%. So nearly 6 out of 10 students at this school are not proficient in math in grades 4 and 5, even though only 15% of the school is low income. So there's a huge disparity between the amount of low-income kids there and the number of kids who are not proficient in mathematics. And so even if every single child who was labeled low income at that school performed poorly on this test, that meant a lot of kids who were non-low income, who were middle class, probably also were performing below the proficient level. And the proficient level on this exam is what the Michigan State Board of Education says that every student should be performing at. So let's go to a middle school. Now, this school is in Brighton, Scranton Middle School, which again is between Ann Arbor and Detroit. And the median home value in this school zip code in Brighton is similar to the one in Macomb. It's about $218,300, which is about 90% or so higher than the statewide median here in Michigan. Got 1,000 students here at Scranton Middle School, and only 12%, even less than Mohawk Elementary, only 12% of those students at Scranton Middle School in 2013 were were categorized as low income. Yet, look at the non-proficiency rates amongst middle-class students. You find that in grade 7, 56% of the students there were not performing at the proficient level on the math examination, and in the 8th grade, 52%. So let's go look at high schools. These are high schools in the Detroit suburbs. Eisenhower High School there is in Shelby Township, which I'm sure all of you know, and is one of the fastest growing communities in the Detroit area. And at Eisenhower High School, only 11% of the students are labeled low income. So only about 1 in 10 of the students are low income. And yet 55% of the students on the Michigan merit exam fail to perform at the proficient level on the state exam. The next school is Clarkston High School. Clarkston, as you know, is in Oakland County, northern suburb of Detroit. And over there's 15% of the students are low income. And yet 61% of the students fail to perform at proficiency on the Michigan merit exam in mathematics. And finally, we have Grosse Pointe North High School, which is in Grosse Pointe Woods, which I'm sure a lot of you know, another suburb of Detroit in Wayne County. 18% of the students there are low income, so basically less than 2 out of 10, and yet 59% of the students there are failing to perform at the proficient level in mathematics. And I'm giving you a lot of these statistics, but there are real people behind these statistics. So there are students who realize they are not getting the type of education that they would like to have gotten. All right. So therefore, it's not just numbers on a page. It's like, for example, at Grosse Pointe North High School, I did a recent posting on a website that solicits comments about schools across the country. There was this comment from a recent graduate at Grosse Pointe North. This person said, as a graduate of Grosse Pointe North, now attending the University of Michigan, I felt unprepared my first year of college. The coursework at North was fairly easy with little application to what was being taught, and in the student's judgment said that I feel as though the curriculum should have been more focused on preparing students for college courses. So, it's not just the fact that these students are doing poorly on this examination, they're feeling it when they go on to college, because people at places like Grosse Pointe North do often go on to higher education. And are they prepared for the coursework they're going to receive? And even at a place where most lay people here in Michigan probably gives a good education, it turns out that these students feel unprepared when they go to college. So, we've been in the Detroit area. How about in other parts of Michigan? In Grand Rapids, you have a school called Kraft Meadows Middle School, which is in Caledonia, which is about 15 miles outside of Grand Rapids. And, the zip code in which the school is located, the home values, again, nearly double of what the statewide median is. You got about 500 kids who are at Kraft Meadows Middle School, and less than 2 out of 10, 19% of those kids are low income. And yet, at Kraft Meadows, you see that on the math state test, you have 65% of sixth graders and 68% of seventh graders who failed to perform at proficiency. So that, again, less than 2 out of 10 kids are low income, yet among seventh graders, nearly 7 out of 10 are failing to perform at the proficient level. Let me give you just one more example in this whole line of research, and that's here in the Lansing area. Delta Center Elementary School, which is in Delta Township, just near here, has 580 students. Less than 1 out of 4, 24% of the kids are low income, and yet on the math examination in 2013, 58% of third graders, 59% of fifth graders, and 65% of sixth graders all failed to perform at the proficient level on the examination. So that's one definition that we have about performance. The second definition we have is that what if we looked at all these schools, these 677 schools, and we compared them against similar schools, all right, that have the same number of low-income kids. So what we did was a school that had, so our underperformance definition number 2 is a school that had at least one grade level where the subject matter proficiency rate on the state test was below the average performance of schools with the same income status demographics. So therefore, for example, if you were to look at all the schools with 13% low-income kids, all right, of course, if you looked at just that group of schools, you would see that there is an average performance amongst those schools. Well, what about the schools that were performing below that average? Those were the schools that we then looked at in this part of the study. So out of that 677 pool of regular public schools with predominantly non-low-income students, all right, you actually had 534, or 79%, where you had at least one grade level where the subject matter proficiency rate on the state test was below the average performance of schools with the same student income demographics. So again, as I said, all the schools with 13%, or 14%. So if you looked at all of those schools under the average, how many schools were there? And it would be 534. And let me show you how this all works, using one particular school as an example. So this is Grosse Ile Middle School, which is in Grosse Ile Township, which is just outside of Detroit again. And again, the median home price there, just like these other schools, was just about double the median home price statewide. There are 470 kids at Grosse Ile Middle School, and only 10% of those kids are low income. So 1 out of 10 of the kids there are low income. And so if you, again, looking at the math scores, in the 6th grade, 49% of the kids there were not proficient. All right, so under that cutoff that we have under the first definition, right? Remember, under the first definition of underperformance, we say that a school had to have 50% or more of the kids who were not proficient in order to be defined as a low-performing school under that first definition. So even though this school came close, 49%, it didn't go over that 50% benchmark, right? Now in the grades 7 and 8, it did go over. 55% and 56% of the kids in 7th and 8th grade were not proficient on the math examination in 2013. But what about how the school performed grade by grade, when compared with similar schools with similar demographics? So if you look here, and I apologize for the bar on grade 6. If you look closely, that bar actually shows 13.5. It should actually be 11.5. That's what happens when you're entering numbers late at night. And so, but it should be 11.5. But what that means is that these bars represent the percentage points below the average performance of similar schools on the 2013 math exam. So in the 6th grade, Grosse-Ile middle schoolers perform 11.5% below the average performance of schools with that same 10% low-income level, okay? In the 7th grade, 17% below the average amongst all 7th graders taking that test. And in the 8th grade, 12.5% below the average. And so it's important, that's one of the reasons why we compared schools against other schools with similar demographics, because sometimes you can miss school underperformance simply because they meet a, what may seem to be an artificial cutoff, And again, as I was telling you, like there's a big difference in reading versus math. Now here, if you look at the reading scores at Grosse-Ile, it's pretty indicative of how high the reading proficiency rates are here in Michigan. So for example, on the 6th grade reading exam, only 23% of the kids were not proficient in reading. Remember, 49% in math. In grade 7, 29% were not proficient. In grade 8, 21% were not proficient. And if you remember in mathematics, there were much higher non-proficiency rates, right? So it shows that there's a real difference between the proficiency rates in mathematics and reading here in Michigan. Now, again, even though that might seem, at least in reading, what people might say, well, at least they do well in reading. Well, maybe not, at least not as well as schools with similar demographics. So, for example, if you look at how Grosse-Ile Middle School compared with other schools with similar demographics in reading, you find out that in the 6th grade, they were 8.4 percentage points below the average performance of similar schools. The 7th grade, 13.5 percentage points below, and in the 8th grade, 3.4%. So in each of these grade levels, they were performing below the average performance of schools with similar demographics. In fact, on all 6 of the tests that are administered at Grosse-Ile, the 3 mathematics examinations and the 3 reading examinations, in 2013, the school performed below the average of schools with similar demographics. That's, remember, 10% low income. So it goes to show you that that there are some performance issues, serious performance issues at a place like this. And so I know that one of the things that people in Michigan love is to always be compared to Ohio. And so thanks to our friends over at the Mackinac Center who suggested that we compare Michigan's performance with Ohio's performance, that's what we did. So we looked at the 8th grade reading and math exam, the test scores on that National Assessment of Educational Progress, that national test I mentioned to you. And so the NAEP examination is given in the 4th and 8th grade. So we decided to, just for purposes of this presentation, we looked at the 8th grade reading and math. And the red bar is the non-proficiency rate for Michigan. The blue bar is the non-proficiency rate for Ohio. So what you can see is that in 8th grade reading, that 50%, exactly 50% of Ohio non-low-income kids in the 8th grade failed to perform at proficiency. In Michigan, 55%. In math, in Ohio, 46% of non-low-income Ohio 8th graders failed to perform at the proficient level, and in Michigan, 58%. So 12 percentage point difference between those 2 performances amongst these non-low-income group of students. So, I mean, obviously, that tells you a couple of things. First of all, it tells you that, amongst similar demographics, Michigan is not performing as well as Ohio. Secondly, if you look at the reading scores for Michigan, again, what I mentioned earlier is that 55% of the non-low-income kids on the 8th grade NAEP reading examination failed to perform at the proficient level. And the NAEP test is usually considered, not only the nation's report card, it's usually considered equivalent in terms of international benchmarking with definitions of proficiency in international exams that are used around the world. So it really is a highly respected exam. And so the fact that you have 55% of the students in 8th grade reading here in Michigan who fail to perform at proficiency, versus, like as I showed you, rates that were seem much higher, or at least the non-proficiency rates were much lower on the state exams here in Michigan, shows that there's something wrong in terms of the state exams here, that there's grade inflation, basically, in reading. Because the math scores are roughly similar to what we're seeing here in Michigan. But the reading scores here tell a much different and much worse story on the NAEP exam versus the MEP exam, for example. So what does this all tell us? Well, what this tells us is that these results should cause middle-class parents here in Michigan to rethink their view about the education options and policy options available to them. I think that one of the reasons why we did this project, not just for Michigan, but just in general for all these different states, is to dispel, we hope to dispel the view amongst many middle-class parents that the only poor-performing schools are in inner-city urban areas, and that since they have moved out to nice, beautiful neighborhoods in the suburbs, that they have therefore escaped underperformance in their local public schools. And what these results show is that that's not necessarily the case. Yes, there is underperformance in inner-city urban areas, in East Los Angeles, in Detroit, in parts of El Paso or Houston or places like that, or Chicago. But it's not limited to places like that. And just because you live in a area like in the film that we did on our original Not As Good As You Think study in California, we profiled a school in the Silicon Valley, one of the most beautiful neighborhoods out in the Silicon Valley, in the Saratoga-Campbell area, for those of you who may know that area outside of San Jose in Northern California. And it's a beautiful school, at least to look at. The beautifully painted, beautifully mowed lawns. The sports team does really well. But when you look at the performance of the kids on the California state examinations, it's very similar to the performance you see here in Michigan. So that phenomenon is something that we need to let parents around the country know about. And so they need to consider the types of options that right now they think are only being proposed for those kids in these low-income inner-city areas. So, because one of the things that we believe that they should consider are things such as school choice options, so that they have the ability to have some kind of exit ticket to leave their school immediately. We believe that it's important to improve the public schools, and we have come out in different types of studies on different subjects such as digital learning, curriculum, effective teaching. Those are all kinds of methods to improve the schools. But something, even with those types of methods, it's going to take a lot of time. Because schools are large organizations. Implementing those types of reforms and changes is not easy to begin with, and even when they are implemented, it takes time to implement them fully and effectively. And in the meantime, what happens to the kids who are stuck in that ineffective schools? They have to linger and wait for these reforms, if they do come, to eventually take effect. And kids, as I mentioned earlier, even if 1 year of an ineffective school sets them back a long ways, then several years waiting for reforms to take place can really destroy their educational and learning careers. And so therefore, they need an immediate exit ticket out of an underperforming school. And so there are a lot of potential choices around the country that have been tried and are proving to do well. That's the one good thing about school choice now, is that we have examples of what's been implemented in other parts of the country. Whereas, a number of years ago, we really didn't have that. A lot of it was just, this is kind of theoretical stuff, based upon recommendations of folks from the Mackinac and folks from the Pacific Research Institute. Now we actually have actual programs that have been implemented across the country. For example, in Illinois, there's a universal tuition tax credit, albeit at a relatively low level, but all parents, no matter the income level, are eligible for a tax credit that they can use to pay for different educational expenses, including private school tuition. The Friedman Foundation for Educational Choice, based in Indiana, has termed the Illinois universal tax credit one of the potentially best in the country if the amount of the tax credit were actually raised above its relatively low level. But in concept, it's a very good piece. In Arizona, you have education savings accounts where the state government puts money in a student's account which can then be used by the parents and the students for various education services, including tutoring, online education, private school options. So, and that has been working well over the last several years. And before, there were a few pilot type of voucher programs, which, like for example in Milwaukee, which is the most famous, where you had mostly low-income kids, and a relatively small number of them, who were eligible for those types of voucher programs. Now you're having programs implemented which have larger reach, so that you have more non-low-income parents and children who are eligible for voucher programs. Indiana has that type of program where you have a significant number of non-low-income parents are eligible for the Indiana program. Not all, but at least some. So it's not just geared to low-income students. And so therefore, I think Michigan has the opportunity to look at a number of those types of options. I know that the folks here at the Mackinac Center have proposed various things throughout the years, that are similar to the ones that we're talking about, and have very Michigan-specific details on their proposals. Maybe in the Q&A, if they'd like to talk about that, we can. But I think that what this does is it would give parents. First of all, we need to let parents know that in these neighborhoods where they're paying high mortgage payments for these expensive houses, that they're not always getting the bang for their buck in terms of the quality of the school that they're sending their kids to. And once they are armed with that information, then they can make the decision, hopefully, if they have the policy options available to them, about whether they want to stick it out at that school, or do they want to go to a different alternative. And I think that one of the things that we'd like to see is to have that debate on a wider, broader scale here in Michigan, and bring in people from middle class and more affluent areas where the underperformance is palpable, and as we see here, that we've found in large numbers. So with that, I want to thank you so much for listening through my long presentation here, looking at a lot of numbers, looking at a lot of graphs, and so I appreciate that. And as Dan said in his introduction, we have lots of studies here for you to take if you want to spread them around to your friends and to your local lawmakers, especially your local lawmakers. We'd love to have you do that because one of the things we want to do is change the policy debate here in Michigan, as we've had the opportunity to do in Texas, Illinois, and other places. So yes, is it John? Did you have a question? Okay.
Yeah. No, go ahead. You said that we should consider option. Thank you. Consider options. Since Michigan has constitutional prohibition on most of these recommendations, do you have any sense that the present charter school model in the more affluent areas is an option for better performance? I don't even know if there are charter schools in affluent areas, but have you had a chance to look at any of that?
Well, yeah, that's a very good question. And I want to thank, first of all, Audrey Spalding with Mackinac, who's actually written a lot on this for Mackinac in this area. My understanding from Audrey's work is that there are a lot of charter schools here in Michigan, but the large number of them are located in lower income areas. So you don't have a lot of charter schools that are in these types of areas that I'm talking about here. And so effectively, or immediately, the parents don't have that option of pulling their kids out and sending them to an existing charter school. Now, hopefully this will light a fire under them to maybe look at, successful charter school models in Michigan, maybe in lower income areas, and import those models into their neighborhoods. But again, it takes some time to do that, and so, but there are, I've done a lot of work on charter schools. I wrote a book called Free to Learn, which outlined successful, effective, performance-increasing models of charter schools in California. And so there's no reason why those types of successful models can't be used across the country. In fact, after Hurricane Katrina down in Louisiana, I did a seminar in New Orleans for the new charter school principals down there about ways to use successful charter models to ensure that their students in the new charter schools in New Orleans were going to have the access to a higher performing model. So, again, I think charter schools have a lot to recommend them. There are a lot of really good ones around the country. And I think that from reading what Audrey has written, that I wish there were more of them in these areas, these middle-class areas in Michigan.
All right, if you have a question, please write it down on one of the cards, and we'll collect those and get to several of these. One thing I want to mention, too, is that our next event is on May 20th. It's at the Capitol Building in rooms 402 and 403. It's on civil asset forfeiture. We'll have Democrat Representative Jeff Irwin with us, ACLU of Michigan, and also an official from the Institute for Justice. So quite a panel for that issue of civil asset forfeiture, where the government can take private property of citizens without a charge. Question for you. How did the low-income students or low-income schools do compared to the non-low-income schools?
Well, we didn't look at the low-income schools. We would just focus on the non-low-income schools. So I can't really tell you, in terms of giving you the exact numbers that we have for this study, and if we were to use the definition for low income. But I will say that if you looked at the results on the National Assessment for Educational Progress, the NAEP exam, and you look, and you can tease out the performance of low-income students in Michigan and the performance of non-low-income students here in Michigan. And while the performance of non-low-income students here in Michigan was not good, remember, 50-something% of the kids were not proficient in reading and mathematics in the 8th grade. The performance amongst low-income students on the NAEP exam was worse, and that's not surprising. But for us, the story is not that the low-income kids did poorly on NAEP, because there have been years and decades of efforts to address the needs of those low-income kids. The story is, for us anyway, that most people don't know about, is the non-low-income kids are also not doing well. And that's what we need to get out to the public.
That's one of the questions here that says, studies of effectiveness of school choice has largely been limited to low-income students. Will this work for middle-class students as well?
Yeah, I have to think so, because the effective school models, are effective school models, and so they should work, across income levels. But again, even where let me just bring up a particular case. This is anecdotal, but I think it shows you how school choice could work for an individual family. One of the books that I just wrote, in fact, in your introduction, Dan, you mentioned that I had written a book called Short Circuited, which talked about the digital learning revolution, the online learning education here in the United States, but specifically California, but it really is applicable to the rest of the country. In that book, I profile this one family where the student is a young boy with special needs. He's autistic, and he grew up and went to school in regular public schools in a very progressive area of California, Santa Cruz. For those of you who know California, California, overall politically is very progressive, but Santa Cruz is pretty much off the charts. And so, but he So he went to school there, but received for various, things. I mean, there are a lot of nightmare stories, in fact, about his treatment there in the Santa Cruz public school system, but which I won't go into. But his parents eventually pulled him out of that school and enrolled him into a virtual charter school, where all his learning was done at home through a charter school, and he was able to, rise from being a below basic performing student to performing at either the proficient or advanced level in his core subjects. Again, he had, significant autistic issues. And yet, because he had that individualized learning program that the virtual school afforded him, he was able to really excel. And so, examples like that indicate to me that, it's not just kids who are from low-income areas who are going to be helped by choice options.
We know that Mr. Izumi is going to be here for a little while longer, so if you didn't get your question answered, he is available afterwards, because he told me he wanted to take in a Lansing Lugnut game, but unfortunately they're out of town.
That just goes to show you that even though you work for a think tank, you don't think a lot ahead, right? I'm probably one of the biggest baseball fans in the country, and I don't plan it when the Lugnuts are at home. So
next time we have you here, we'll definitely schedule it around a game. This says most suburban parents would disagree that their schools are poor performing. Any suggestions to change the way we evaluate schools to provide a more accurate assessment?
No, I agree with that. I think that, again, if you look at, like, for example, gradeschools.net, which is a website that rates and presents a lot of accountability information for all the schools in the country, and you look at the reviews that those schools get, especially these middle-class schools, you'll find a lot of parents who will say how wonderful the school is, even though on that same website they may have, test information about those schools that show that, hey, that school isn't so great. And so I think it's this difference, this dichotomy between perception amongst the parents about how their school is versus the actual performance of the school itself. Now, some parents, I must say, at these schools really do understand the difference between the perception and reality. In fact, in our study, you'll find that in a number of the schools that we profile, because we don't just list these aggregate numbers, we actually will do profiles in different parts of Michigan, southeastern Michigan, mid-Michigan, Flint area, wherever, about how well individual schools are doing. And what we try to do is we look to see what are the comments of parents and what are the comments of the school district itself about how well their schools are doing. Of course, what the district says about their schools is that they're all wonderful, right? They got great staffs, that there's a lot of, they're promoting excellence, etc. And then you often see comments of parents where that's not the case. At least that's not what they're seeing amongst their kids in the school. And so what we need to do is get that reality, to more of the parents who simply have the perception. And I think one of the first ways we do that is by giving them that initial amount of information. One of the things is that in our study is that we have an interactive website with the data for each individual school amongst those 677 schools. So you can look up your school and find out how well it's doing or how badly it's doing. And so, you just have to go, click, enter in your school, and, all that information will pop up. And so, Rowena and her team in our institute have done a lot of work to ensure that, it's very parent-friendly in order to get this information out to people. And then once that's, people understand that there is a problem in middle-class neighborhoods, then they can go to their state representatives, as this gentleman noted, there are significant issues in the state constitution preventing a lot of things that other states might consider when it comes to choice. And so, how do you, work around that? How do you still try and give parents choice in this type of state constitutional environment? Middle-class parents have to be part of that discussion. It can't just be some very good and committed school reform advocates in Detroit. It needs to be people in Grosse Ile. It needs to be people in Grand Rapids, in Traverse City, you know.
Where the beach bums play.
Where the beach bums play, and where I'm going to go next season. So, it has to be in all these places in Michigan, and it cannot be limited to it's just that guy in his neighborhood, other guy. So.
All right, let's give Lance Izumi one more round of applause, please.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
And again, May 20th is our next event at the Capitol Building, rooms 402 and 403. Please register on our website for that civil asset forfeiture. Should be a good one. Have a good afternoon.